Claire Evans had spent the evening in her usual routine, a quiet dinner, a long soak in the tub, and a mug of chamomile tea in hand, curled up in her favorite flannel robe. The house felt empty without her son Ethan, who had moved out after college. And her ex-husband Thomas had long since disappeared from her life. At 42, she'd come to enjoy the solitude, even if sometimes it made her wonder what might have been. The soft hum of the heater and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows were the only sounds in the house. Claire had just turned off the kitchen light, ready to settle in for another night alone with her thoughts, when a sudden knock at the door startled her. It was firm, urgent, not the usual quiet tapping she'd hear from a neighbor. Her heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? Claire moved cautiously toward the door, her slippers making soft sounds against the hardwood floor. She glanced through the peephole. The figure outside was blurry at first, just the outline of a man and a woman standing in the rain. Her pulse quickened. She recognized the man immediately, was Ethan, but the woman next to him was a stranger, standing too close to him for comfort. The two of them were soaked from the rain, their hair clinging to their faces, their clothes damp and clinging to their skin. Claire hesitated for a moment, confused and a little shaken. Ethan, her son, hadn't mentioned anything about coming by tonight, let alone bringing someone with him. She opened the door slowly, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the sight of her son standing there with the woman. "Mom." Ethan's voice was hesitant, almost as if he wasn't sure how to begin. His hands were in his pockets and he looked at her with wide eyes, as if searching for some kind of understanding. "Can we come in? It's a long story." Claire didn't say anything at first, still processing the unexpected knock. She stepped aside to let them in, and as she did, her eyes shifted to the woman. Something about her seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. "Thanks." "Mom," Ethan muttered as he entered, shaking the rain from his hair, his face tired but also unsure. Claire closed the door behind them, trying to keep her voice steady. "You didn't tell me you were coming. What's going on? And who's this?" The woman shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flickering between Claire and Ethan. She was beautiful, but there was something in her gaze that made Claire's heart beat a little faster, a memory stirring just beneath the surface. "This is Julia," Ethan explained. "She's my girlfriend. We've been dating for almost a year now." Claire blinked, surprised. She had no idea Ethan had been seeing anyone. The last she'd heard, he'd been focused on his work in the city, his life consumed by his career and a few scattered friends. It was hard to imagine him in a serious relationship, let alone one that had lasted for nearly a year without her knowing about it. Julia gave a soft smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Claire noticed that her shoulders were tense, as though she were bracing for something. "What happened?" Claire asked, her voice softer now, her concern growing. "You both look like you've been through a storm, literally." Julia glanced at Ethan, then back at Claire. We were traveling together. Things didn't go as planned. We were in a car accident just outside of town. Nothing serious, but it shook us up a bit. The rain made it worse, so we decided to head here." Claire took in the information, her mind spinning. An accident. Why hadn't Ethan called her earlier? And why hadn't he mentioned anything about Julia? "Where's your car?" she asked, still unsure whether to let them in completely. "It's on the side of the road," Ethan said, looking down, clearly not wanting to get into the details. Claire's eyes darted between them, instinctively sensing that there was more to the story than they were letting on. "It's late," Claire finally said, sighing. "You can both stay the night, but we'll talk in the morning." The storm outside raged on, the wind howling against the windows. Ethan nodded, looking relieved, while Julia stood a little further back, her arms crossed tightly around herself as though trying to protect something inside her. Claire felt a shiver run through her, an unspoken tension in the air. "Thanks, Mom," Ethan said again. "I didn't know where else to go. Julia's been through a lot lately, and I just wanted to make sure she was okay." Claire didn't say anything more. She led them both to the guest room and handed them towels, showing them where the spare blankets were and offering a hot drink. As she did, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about Julia wasn't adding up. It wasn't just the way she looked at Ethan, there was something about her that pulled at Claire. Something that she couldn't ignore. The night dragged on, and as Claire moved to the kitchen to clean up, she found herself lost in thought. She couldn't get the image of Julia's face out of her mind. That familiarity, that haunting gaze, it wasn't just her beauty that stood out. It was something deeper. Something Claire hadn't thought about in years. The memory hit Claire like a bolt of lightning. She gasped and dropped the dish she was washing into the sink. Julia, it couldn't be. But it was. The woman standing in her kitchen was that Julia. The same Julia from her past. The one Claire had tried to forget. The woman she had kissed years ago on a summer night when she had just finished college. The one she had never spoken to again, not after everything ended so suddenly, without explanation. And now, here she was, standing in Claire's home, her home with her son. Claire's pulse quickened. This was more than just a coincidence. But what was the truth? Why hadn't Julia told her about her connection to Ethan before? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the kitchen doorframe. Julia was standing there, hesitating, her eyes locked on Claire. "Are you okay?" Julia asked, her voice softer than it had been all night. Claire nodded, not trusting herself to speak just yet, and as she looked into Julia's eyes, all the old feelings flooded back, feelings she had buried deep within herself. She hadn't been prepared for this, for the past to come rushing back in such an unexpected way. Claire stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at Julia, who was now leaning against the doorframe. Her posture tense and unsure. It was like a wall had gone up between them, Claire's past, her carefully built life, and this moment that felt like it was pulling her back to something she had tried so hard to forget. Julia's eyes flickered down briefly, as though she was debating how much to say. Claire noticed her discomfort and felt a familiar pull in her chest. A mix of confusion, old feelings, and a growing sense of urgency. "You're—" Claire started, but her voice caught in her throat. She cleared it and tried again. "You're that Julia, aren't you?" Julia's face went pale, and she nodded slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the weight of the past. "You've been with Ethan this whole time." Claire's voice was low, but there was a sharp edge to it now. A mix of disbelief and something else she wasn't ready to admit yet. Julia hesitated before speaking, her eyes avoiding Claire's. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I didn't know Ethan was your son until tonight. I didn't even know he was Ethan Evans." Claire felt a sting of frustration, but she tried to keep her composure. "How could you not know? You've been with him for nearly a year." Julia took a step into the kitchen, pulling her damp sweater tighter around her shoulders. "We met through mutual friends. I didn't know his full name at first. And we never talked about family, his or mine. I never asked." The last time Claire had seen Julia, they were both young and filled with dreams, running on the heat of a summer romance. Their connection had been intense, almost too much for both of them. But then Julia had vanished, leaving only the memory of their fleeting moments together. A kiss under the stars, a brief but unforgettable spark. "Why did you leave?" Claire's voice was quieter now, the edge gone but replaced with a deep, quote, unspoken longing. Julia flinched as if the question had struck her harder than she expected. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I didn't mean to leave like that," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I was young. I didn't understand what was happening between us, and I was scared." Claire shook her head, struggling to understand. "Scared of what?" "Of everything," Julia whispered, her eyes now filled with regret. "Of how quickly we fell into each other. Of how real it felt. I wasn't ready for that. I ran. And I couldn't come back." Claire felt the air grow heavier, each word dragging her deeper into memories she had tried so hard to bury. She wanted to be angry, to demand answers, but instead, she felt something else rise inside her, a sorrow. A mourning for the love that never had a chance to grow. The love that had slipped through her fingers without warning. "You never called. You never wrote. You just disappeared," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know, Julia said softly, her eyes glistening. I regret it every day. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint crackling of the heater. Claire didn't know what to say next. Everything she had built over the years, the quiet life, the independence, the careful walls she'd put up was now crumbling in the face of a love she hadn't wanted to remember but couldn't seem to forget. Ethan, who had been sitting in the living room, walked in just as the silence between them grew too thick to bear. His eyes bounced between them, sensing the tension in the air. "What's going on?" he asked, a note of concern in his voice. Claire turned to him, trying to saint. The house was quiet again. Rain tapped gently on the windows, softer now, like the storm had lost its anger. Ethan had gone to bed, too tired and overwhelmed to ask any more questions. Claire stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty teacup in front of her, lost in thought. Julia hadn't gone to bed. She stood near the living room window, arms crossed, watching the rain. Her damp hair clung to her neck, and though she was now in dry clothes borrowed from Claire, she still looked like she was carrying weight that wouldn't leave her. Claire finally broke the silence. "You could have told me?" Julia turned slowly. "I didn't plan any of this." Claire nodded, but her face stayed hard. "I know, still." Julia walked back into the kitchen, but kept her distance. "It's strange. I've imagined seeing you again so many times, but not like this." Claire laughed lightly, bitter and soft. No one imagines a reunion with their old flame in pajamas with their grown son standing in the middle. Julia smiled for a second, then looked down. "Do you hate me?" Claire was quiet. "No, I wanted to for a long time. But no, I was scared back then," Julia said. "Not just of what we had. Of everything. I didn't know how to live with what I felt. It was too real. Too fast. You left without a word." "I know." Julia's voice dropped. "I regret that more than anything." Claire exhaled deeply, holding the edge of the kitchen counter like it could anchor her. "You broke my heart. I waited. Weeks passed. Then months. I told myself it was nothing. Just a summer thing. But I knew better. And you knew too?" "I did," Julia whispered. "I was in love with you. I just didn't know how to be brave enough to stay." Claire's eyes met hers, and everything else disappeared. The years between them, the distance. The pain, it all floated somewhere in the space between their gazes. Julia stepped a little closer. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left?" Claire didn't answer right away. She looked away, blinking back a wave of emotion she wasn't ready to share. "Sometimes. But then life moves on, and you don't let yourself ask those kinds of questions." "But you did ask," Julia said gently. "Tonight I saw it in your face." Claire folded her arms, guarding herself. "You're with my son." Julia shook her head quickly. "No, Ethan is. I care about him. But I think we both knew it wasn't going to last. I tried to love him, Claire. I really did. But my heart wasn't free. I think I was searching for something in him that reminded me of you." Claire's breath caught. "That's not fair to him." "I know," Julia said, guilt heavy in her voice. "That's why I was going to end it. I just hadn't found the right moment. And now, being here, it's clear." Claire moved to the window, staring out into the darkness. Her voice was low, almost broken. "This could ruin him. If he finds out. If he understands what's really going on here, I would never hurt him," Julia said quickly. "He's kind, good. He deserves someone who loves him the way he deserves to be loved." Silence again. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the slow, heavy seconds. Julia walked over to Claire, gently placing a hand on her arm. "I never stopped thinking about you. Not once. Every relationship I had after you, I kept comparing. No one else felt like home." Claire looked down at Julia's hand, then into her eyes. "You feel like a memory I never got to finish." "Then maybe it's time we finish it," Julia said. Claire didn't pull away, but she didn't move closer either. Her voice was unsure. "Too much has changed, KB," Julia said. "But maybe we're still the same where it matters." Claire searched her face, looking for lies, for signs of confusion or doubt, but all she saw was honesty. And it terrified her. "Let me stay," Julia said softly. "Not just tonight. I don't mean in your house. I mean, let me be in your life again, even if it's just as a friend, even if that's all we can have." Claire stared at her, emotions swirling fast. "I don't know if I can trust you." Julia nodded. "Then let me earn it back." They stood there, quiet, breathing the same air, wrapped in years of silence and moments they never got to have. Finally, Claire looked away, but not before her voice cracked slightly. "I should get some sleep." Julia stepped back, respectful. "Of course. Good night, Claire." Claire turned and walked toward the hallway, then paused. She glanced back. "Good night, Julia." Julia smiled faintly. "Sweet dreams." As Claire disappeared into her room, she closed the door gently, leaning against it for a moment. Her heart was pounding. Her mind was racing. She hadn't expected any of this. Not the memories. Not the feelings. Not Julia down the hall. Julia lay awake on the guest bed, staring at the ceiling. She could still smell Claire's shampoo on the pillow. She closed her eyes, but rest didn't come. They were both wide awake in the same house, lying in separate rooms, carrying a shared past neither of them had ever finished writing. And maybe, just maybe, the next chapter was still waiting. Sunlight crept in through the windows, casting soft golden lines across the wooden floors. The storm had passed, and the house felt quiet, calm, but not empty. Claire stood in the kitchen again, this time dressed and collected, flipping pancakes on the stove like she used to when Ethan was a boy. The smell of coffee filled the air. Everything looked normal, but inside she felt anything but. Last night had changed something. She hadn't said it out loud, but she'd felt it in the way her chest tightened when Julia spoke, in the way her heart pulled when Julia said she still remembered. Still felt something. Claire poured coffee into 3 mugs, placing them on the table as Ethan walked in, yawning, rubbing his eyes. He gave her a lopsided smile, his voice still sleepy. "You made pancakes?" "I figured it's been a while," Claire said, trying to keep her tone light. Ethan sat down, looking around. "Is Julia up?" As if on cue, Julia stepped into the kitchen, dressed in one of Claire's soft sweaters and her own jeans from yesterday, now dry. Her hair was tied back loosely. She looked unsure, like someone waking up in a place that felt both familiar and strange. "Morning," she said quietly, glancing at both of them. Claire gave a polite smile. "Morning. Coffee's on the table. Thanks." Julia took a seat, folding her hands in her lap, careful not to look at Claire too long. The 3 sat in a slow, awkward silence, the only sound coming from forks scraping plates and coffee being sipped. Ethan was the first to break it. "So, about last night," he began carefully, eyes darting between them. "You two clearly have history. You don't have to explain everything, but I'd rather not be in the dark." Claire put down her fork. She looked at her son, her expression honest and calm. "Julia and I knew each other when we were young. Before you were born, we were close." Ethan nodded slowly, piecing things together. "Like, really close." Claire hesitated. "Yes." Julia spoke next, her voice low. "It was real. It just didn't last. That was my fault. I left." Ethan looked at her, confused but not angry. "You never said anything. You didn't even hint." "I couldn't," Julia said. "I didn't even know who your mom was. I didn't connect the names. I promise, Ethan, I didn't plan any of this." He looked down at his plate, his mind clearly working fast. "So, what now? Where does this leave us?" Claire sighed. "That's a fair question." "I don't want to come between you two," Ethan said suddenly, setting his fork down. "If there's something still there between you, I'm not going to stand in the way. I think I already knew something wasn't right between Julia and me." Julia blinked. "You did." He nodded. "You were never fully present. You were kind, thoughtful, but part of you always felt far away, like you were holding back. I just didn't know why." Claire swallowed hard. watching her son speak with such calm understanding. He looked older in that moment, more mature than she remembered. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Ethan gave a small smile. "I think I needed to come here. Maybe this was supposed to happen." Claire looked at Julia, who had gone quiet again. There was something vulnerable in her face, hope mixed with fear. After breakfast, Ethan packed his things. Claire stood at the doorway, watching him place his bag in the back seat of his car. "I'll call you when I get back," he said, giving her a hug. "Don't overthink everything, okay?" She smiled, brushing a hand through his hair like she used to. "I'll try." He turned to Julia. "Take care of her." Julia nodded. "I will." And then he was gone. The silence after Ethan left wasn't heavy. It felt open, like something had been cleared, something that had been sitting in the way for years. Claire turned to Julia. "Want to take a walk?" They walked slowly down the small street, golden leaves scattered across the sidewalks. The sky was crisp and clear, the air cool, but not cold. It felt like the beginning of something, or maybe the continuation of something left unfinished. They didn't talk at first, just walked, letting the quiet fill the space where fear used to live. Finally, Claire spoke. "He handled it better than I expected. He's a good man," Julia said. "You raised him well." Claire glanced at her. "I tried." They reached the park near the end of the street, the one where Claire used to take Ethan when he was little. They sat on a bench beneath a tree losing its leaves. Julia turned to her. "I meant what I said last night. I never stopped thinking about you." Claire nodded. "I believe you." "I don't know what's supposed to happen now," Julia continued. "I don't want to rush anything. I don't want to make things harder. But I would stay if you let me." Claire took a deep breath. "I'm not sure either. Part of me wants to jump in. The other part still remembers how it felt when you left." "I won't run this time." Claire looked at her. "I need you to mean that."